Welcome to the Investigation Guru, where real-life PIs Sean and Dana bring you to the darker side of true crime investigations. Stories so horrific, it's hard to believe they actually happened. But truth is often darker than fiction. Real life can sometimes involve lies, betrayal, abduction, and even torture and death. These stories will take you on a journey through some of the world's darkest and most notorious true crime investigations. The Investigation Guru starts now. Here's Sean and Dana.
Hello, and welcome to the Investigation Guru podcast. This is the official podcast for Red Door Investigations. My name is Sean, and today we're going to be talking about Jodi Arias. In the summer of 2008, Jodi Arias made national headlines after she was charged with murdering her 30-year-old ex-boyfriend, Travis Alexander, who was working as a motivational speaker and insurance salesman. The shocking and horrifying brutality of the murder, committed by a female nonetheless, along with Arias' bizarre behavior when she was arrested, makes this one of the most unusual cases we've examined thus far. So, without further ado, here is the story of Jodi Arias. A little bit of background. Travis Victor Alexander was born on July 28, 1977 in Riverside, California, to Gary David Alexander and Pamela Elizabeth Morgan Alexander. At the age of 11, Travis moved in with his paternal grandparents. After his father's death in July of 1997, his seven siblings were also taken in by their paternal grandmother. Travis was a salesman and motivational speaker for a company called Prepaid Legal Services. And this is basically one of those kind of, they generally help, a little bit more economically disadvantaged families who are able to prepay for some legal services if they should ever need them in the future. Jodi Ann Arias was born on July 9th, 1980 in Salinas, California to William and Sandra Arias. She was the first of 4 children. She moved out at 17 years of age and moved in with her boyfriend before relocating to Southern California and then later to Arizona. Although Jodi has given several mismatching accounts of her trials while growing up, her mother describes her childhood as pretty normal and otherwise happy. So she had kind of just a normal, everyday, average childhood. She attended the Eureka Union High School but dropped out in the 11th grade. Jodi worked a series of dead-end jobs before she got hired by company called Legal Shield, which is a company that offers low-cost prepaid legal help to individuals, families, and businesses, much like Prepaid Legal, which is where Travis worked. And they actually met at a conference for both of these companies. Jodi worked a series of dead-end jobs before she got hired by Legal Shield, which is a company that offers low-cost prepaid legal services to individuals, families, and businesses. Jodi and Travis met in September of 2006 at a prepaid legal conference in Las Vegas. So the company that Travis was working for, Prepaid Legal, I guess, hosted kind of this legal prepaid business, whatever conference. And the company that Jodi was working for attended. And that's where they first met. Travis and Jodi began dating in February of 2007. And Jodi moved to Mesa, Arizona to be closer to Travis. In 2008, she moved back to Eureka, California and lived there with her grandparents. Jodi and Travis began a long-distance relationship and dated on and off again for about a year and a half, give or take. They would take turns traveling between their respective Arizona and California addresses. So Jodi lived in California, Travis lived in Arizona. It was the kind of the prototypical long distance relationship. You come see me for a little while, and then next time I'll come see you. Travis's friends who knew Jodi and observed them together tended to have a kind of a negative opinion of her, stating that the relationship was unusually tumultuous and that Arias' behavior was worrying. So already pretty early on in the relationship, a lot of Travis's friends kind of noticed that Jodi was probably not really the best fit for him. Apparently he kind of had a certain attraction to the edgier type of women, and Jodi certainly met that description. They had a very, very tumultuous, a very, very whirlwind type of romance. Jodi described that, their sex life was very, very passionate and very, very almost kind of raunchy. She would later go on to describe, Travis's sexual preferences as being very, very unusual, and even go so far as to accuse him of being a pedophile, which kind of never really panned out. There was no evidence to suggest that that Travis had any kind of pedophilic types of tendencies. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the episode. But Jodi and Travis had a very, very sexually charged, sexually fueled, very, very passionate relationship. Travis's friends, they kind of started to notice a little bit of odd behaviors in Jodi pretty early on. And they kind of presented this to Travis and kind of said, are you sure you really want to date this type of girl, et cetera, et cetera? And Travis said, oh, yeah, man, it's just very, very, she's a lot of fun. And she's, the sex is great and that type of thing. But his friends saw a lot of red flags and a lot of warning signs pretty early on. And they remember making a point of this to Travis and kind of giving him a warning that this girl, could turn out to be trouble later on. A few events that kind of led up to the murder, kind of, how their lives started to kind of take a turn. They continued to get back together and break up and get back together and break up. So it was not a real healthy, it was not a healthy relationship at all. There was all kinds of accusations of domestic abuse, domestic violence. They argued and fought all the time. So their relationship from start to finish was pretty much the ideal prototypical version of an unhealthy, unstable relationship. But Jodi began to exhibit a whole lot of types of obsessive behavior. She would call him at all hours of the night and try, wanting to know where he was and who he was with. She accused him of cheating on her constantly. So she was not the healthiest individual. But their relationship was really, really rocky. In early 2008, Travis told friends that Jodi would join him for a week-long trip at Cancun, Mexico, and that was scheduled for June 15th of that year. So Travis kind of planned this, trip to Cancun, and they were going to, rekindle the sparks and all of that. In April of that year, 2008, Travis asked to change his travel companion to another female friend, which probably went over just as well as you think. They apparently had some kind of another fight, falling out, and their fights were pretty legendary. And so Travis just kind of said, screw this. I've got the tickets bought, and I'm just going to take someone else because I don't want to be around you at all. On May 28th, a burglary occurred at the residence of Jodi's grandparents, with whom Arias was living. Among the missing items was a .25 caliber handgun, which was never recovered. So Jodi's grandparents, their house got robbed. A .25 caliber handgun was taken, and which turns out to be the caliber of handgun that was used to murder Travis. This is again significant because a spent .25 caliber round was found near Travis's body at the crime scene. So it's thought that Travis was shot with a .25 caliber handgun, which is the exact model handgun that was stolen from Jodi's grandparents' house. On June 2nd, between 1 and 3 a.m., Jodi called Travis 4 times, but did not appear to get in touch with him, since the longest of these calls was only 17 seconds. After 3 a.m., Travis called Jodi twice, the first time for 18 minutes and the second time for 41 minutes. At 4:03 a.m. of that day, Arias called Alexander back, and the call lasted 2 minutes, 48 seconds. Neither of these calls nor their transcripts were presented at Arias' trial, so we don't really know exactly what was said or the nature of these conversations, but it was probably something having to do with, Jodi either getting very, very angry or trying to get back with Travis. She vacillated between, extreme bouts of anger and then kind of groveling and wanting to come back and say she's sorry and he would take her back. And it was this type of thing back and forth over and over and over and over again. At 5:39 a.m. That day, Jodi set out to drive south to rent a car for a long trip to Utah, as shown by evidence of a gasoline purchase in Eureka. On June 2nd at 8:04 a.m., Arias rented a car in Redding, California, and indicated that she would return the car in Redding later that week. She then visited friends in Southern California on her way to Utah for a prepaid legal work conference, another conference, and to meet with Ryan Burns, who was a co-worker of hers at Prepaid Legal. By late evening on June 3rd, the day before Travis's murder, Jodi apparently set out for Salt Lake City. Travis later that day missed an important conference call on the evening of June 4th, which was the day of his death. The following day, Jodi met up with Ryan Burns in the Salt Lake City suburb of West Jordan, Utah, and attended business meetings for the conference. Burns later said that he noticed Arias's formerly blonde hair was now dark brown, and she had cuts on her hands. So Jodi had changed her hair color, and that she had some kind of, it looked like maybe defensive wounds on her hands. This was, of course, very, very unusual because Jodi had historically been completely blonde. This was enough for him to actually notice that she had changed her hair. On June 6th, she left Salt Lake City and drove west towards California. She called Travis several times and left several voicemail messages for him. This was, of course, after Travis had already been killed. So this, it's highly possible that she made these calls to perhaps establish a cover story that she could use later on. Why would I try to call him if I knew he was dead type thing. She also accessed his cell phone's voicemail system. When she returned the rental car on June 7th, it had been driven about 2,800 miles. The rental clerk testified that the car was missing its floor mats and had red stains on its front and rear seats. It could not be verified that the car had floor mats when Jodi picked it up, and any stains could not be verified since the car was cleaned before the police could examine it. So we don't know if Jodi kind of removed those floor mats in an effort to cover up any evidence that might be in there, or if there was simply just no floor mats on there when Arias took control of the car. But the red stains, that was very, very significant. But again, the vehicle was cleaned prior to police having access to it in order to examine it for any kind of forensic evidence or the like. On June 9th, having been unable to reach Travis, a concerned group of friends went to his home to check on him. His roommates had not seen him for several days, but they believed that he was probably out of town and thus didn't think anything was amiss. Travis traveled all the time. He was kind of trying to build this motivational speaker side gig business that he really wanted to get off the ground. He was trying to write a whole bunch of books, and he really wanted to start this motivational speaker, life coach type thing. So Travis traveled a whole lot. He traveled a lot for his regular job with prepaid legal. This side gig that he was really trying to get off the ground required a whole bunch of travel. So just because they hadn't heard from him in a while and he wasn't at home, that really didn't throw up really any red flags for them at that time. After finding a key to Travis's master bedroom, Travis's friends entered and they found large pools of blood in the hallway. So they quickly came to the realization that Travis, the reason they had not heard from him was because he was dead. They discovered his body in the shower and immediately called 911. In the 911 call, which again wasn't heard by the jury, the dispatcher asked if Travis had been suicidal or if anyone was angry enough to hurt him. His friend specifically and immediately mentioned that Jodi was probably a very good suspect, stating that Travis had said she was stalking him, accessing his Facebook account, slashing his car's tires. Again, all of the red flags that they had when Travis and Jodi first started dating. It was pretty obvious that they thought that this is the work of Jodi Arias. The murder and evidence itself. Travis Alexander died brutally on June 4th, 2008 from almost 30 stab wounds, a slit throat, and a single fatal gunshot to his head. His body wasn't even discovered until June 10th. He was found slumped over in the shower. Medical examiner Kevin Horn, MD, testified that Travis's jugular vein, common carotid artery, and trachea had been slashed and that he had defensive wounds on his hands, indicating that he had tried to defend himself. Horn further testified that Travis may have already been dead at the time the gunshot was inflicted and that the back wounds were very, very shallow. His death was almost immediately ruled a homicide. You can't, self-inflicted that many stab wounds, a gunshot to the head, defensive wounds like that. It's a pretty cut and dry homicide. There was no question whatsoever. Although initially denying that she had anything to do with Travis's murder, incriminating evidence such as a bloody handprint containing both Jodi's and Travis's DNA was found at the scene. So she had DNA present at the scene, bloody handprint. It's not looking good for Jodi. A camera was also found with photos of both of them together that day, Alexander standing in the shower, and even Travis's bloody body, which all, again, contradicted her story that she wasn't there. While searching his home, police found his recently purchased digital camera damaged in the washing machine. Police were able to recover deleted digital images showing Travis and Jodi in sexually suggestive poses, taken at approximately 1:40 p.m. on June 4th. The final picture of Travis alive, showing him in the shower, was taken at 5:29 p.m. that same day. Photos taken moments later show an individual believed to be Travis profusely bleeding on the bathroom floor. A bloody palm print was discovered along the wall of the bathroom hallway. It contained DNA from both Travis and Jodi. On July 9, 2008, Jodi Arias was indicted by a grand jury in Maricopa County, Arizona, for the first-degree murder of Travis Alexander. She was arrested at her home 6 days later and extradited to Arizona on September 5th. Arias pleaded not guilty on September 11th. During this time, she gave several different accounts about her involvement in Travis's death. She originally told police that she had not been in Mesa on the day of the murder and then last seen Travis in March of 2008. She then changed her story and told police that 2 intruders had broken into Travis's home, murdering him and attacking her. 2 years after her arrest, she changed her story yet again and finally told police that she killed Travis in self-defense, claiming that she had been a victim of domestic violence. She also claimed that he was a pedophile, but a search of his computer turned up nothing related to child pornography, so this was most likely a lie. After giving unusual and contradicting accounts of what actually transpired, Jodi eventually confessed to killing Travis, although she claimed she did it in self-defense, suffering a history of domestic abuse. So again, Jodi is constantly changing her story. She's saying one thing, she's saying she wasn't even there, and then evidence is presented that, her DNA is found in this bloody handprint, and so she changes her story and changes her story and changes her story. Oh yeah, I was there. But there were these intruders, and she's spinning all of these different tales, and then she finally comes clean. She admits to killing him, but says that it was in self-defense, and he was attacking me. He had a history of domestic abuse, and he was a pedophile. None of this checked out. She was lying. There was no history of any kind of domestic abuse from Travis to Jodi. Matter of fact, it was actually usually the opposite. And, there was no evidence that he was ever a pedophile or anything like that. The police, examined his computer, and they didn't find any evidence of any kind of child pornography or anything on his computer. All right, the actual trial itself. Jury selection. The trial commenced in Maricopa County Superior Court before Judge Sherry K. Stevens. Initial jury selection began on December 10th, 2012. During jury selection on December 20th, Arias' defense attorneys argued that the prosecution was, quote, systematically excluding, end quote, women and African Americans. So her attorneys, said that, there weren't enough women and African Americans on the jury. Prosecutor Juan Martinez said that race and sex were irrelevant to his decisions to strike certain jurors. So he said that, just because they were women or they were African American had no bearing whatsoever on his desire to, either include them on the jury or remove them from being potential jurors. Judge Stevens ruled that the prosecution had shown no bias in the jury selection and allowed the selection to continue. The guilt phase of the trial. On January 2nd, 2013, the prosecution put forward the death penalty. Jodi was represented by court-appointed counsel L. Kirk Nurmi, Nurmi, and Jennifer Wilmot, who argued that Travis's death was a justifiable homicide committed in self-defense. The prosecution argued that since a .25 caliber round was found near Travis's body and that a gun of the same caliber was stolen from Jodi's residence in Eureka the week before, she had staged the burglary and used the gun to kill Alexander. That gun was very, very damning evidence. Mr. Martinez, the prosecutor, claimed that Jodi had stalked Travis and had slashed his tires at least twice. In addition, in the final days before his death, Travis had called her a sociopath and, quote, the worst thing that ever happened to me, end quote, and said that he was afraid of her. Arias took the stand in her own defense on February 4th, 2013, testifying for a whopping 18 days, a length of time that defense attorney Mark Garagos called unprecedented. On the first day of her testimony, Jodi spun all of these weird, bizarre, conflicting tales of being violently abused by her parents, beginning when she was approximately 7 years old, And as we've kind of discussed at the very beginning of the episode, her parents, said that her childhood was completely normal, happy even. So, Jodi has kind of this history of blaming others and shifting blame away from herself, painting herself as the victim. She testified that she rented a car in Redding because Budget's website gave her two options, one to the north and one to the south, and that her brother lived in Redding. And so, she went down there to visit her brother for a little while, apparently, and just went ahead and rented the car there. On her second day on the stand, she said that her sex life with Travis included oral and anal sex. She said that the anal sex was painful for her the first time they experienced it together, and that while she considered these forms of sex to be, quote, real sex, Travis did not, as they were kind of going against his Mormon rules concerning vaginal intercourse. I'm not really well versed on how Mormons view sex, but I'm sure that it's very, very almost puritanical. That, sex is something for conception, things like that. If any Mormons are listening to the episode, please let me know if I am wrong on that. But anal sex is definitely one of those, we've kind of discussed how their sex life was very, very tumultuous and very, very edgy and things like that. And this is one of those things. A phone sex tape was played in court in which Travis said he wanted to zip tie Arias to a tree and have anal sex with her while she was dressed as Little Red Riding Hood, which Arias seemed to respond to quite enthusiastically. So again, this is, they're throwing in a little bit of role play and things like that to kind of, amplify. Jodi had recorded this conversation without Travis's knowledge or consent, apparently hoping to use it to embarrass Travis to his Mormon peers. So she was planning on essentially blackmailing him. She also testified that Travis had secretly found young boys and girls sexually attractive and that she tried to help him with these urges. Forensic experts again testified that an examination of Travis's computer found no evidence of pornographic material of any kind. So this likely was probably just another story that Jodi was using to paint Travis in a light that would add a lot of weight and credence to her self-defense. Arias further testified that her relationship with Alexander became increasingly physically and emotionally abusive. She said that Travis shook her while saying, "I'm fucking sick of you," end quote, then began screaming at me, after which he, quote, body slammed me on the floor at the foot of his bed, end quote, and taunted her, saying, quote, "Don't act like that hurts," before he called her a bitch and then kicked her in the ribs. Afterward, Jodi said, quote, "He went to kick me again and I put my hand out," end quote. Arias held up her left hand in the courtroom, showing that her ring finger was crooked. Now, whether or not this is a result of that altercation or not is anybody's guess. The jury didn't really seem to buy it. I'm kind of that opinion as well. I think Jodi would spin, all kinds of different tales. Even in the interrogation when she was first arrested, she was behaving very, very bizarrely and erratically. She started singing in the interrogation room when she was left alone, and she would sit in the chair really, really weird and kind of put her legs up on the wall with her feet pointed towards the ceiling. There's all kinds of videos out there, showing this type of behavior. So she almost didn't really comprehend the full weight of what was happening to her and what was going on. So Arias, Jodi kind of really had a lot of issues going on. According to Jodi, the dysfunction in the relationship reached its climax when she killed him in self-defense after he became enraged when she dropped his camera, forcing her to fight for her life. So she said that, she was taking pictures of them together, pictures of Travis, and she accidentally dropped the camera. And that's when he became enraged, came at her. She feared for her life and she shot him. This was actually the third differing account of Travis's death given by Jodi, which both prosecutors, courtroom observers, and later jurors felt severely damaged her credibility. She kept changing her story over and over again. She wouldn't stick to one outcome, to one narrative. And that is the kiss of death. If you keep changing your story, especially on trial in front of jurors, they're going to notice that. And that just damages your credibility, and everything you say can be painted with that brush. And once you're caught lying about one thing, then everything else that you said, even though it may or may not be true, can be painted with that brush, and nothing you say is believed or at least everything that you say can be interpreted as being potentially not true. Travis's other previous girlfriends actually testified that he never exhibited any problems with anger or violence towards them. So again, Travis did not have any kind of history of, violence or anger outbursts or all of these things that Jodi was kind of spinning to, again, paint herself as a victim. None of that was exhibited by Travis with any of his previous relationships. All of his friends said that Travis was usually very, very passive and almost kind of quiet. Starting on March 14th, during the trial, psychologist Richard Samuels testified for the defense for nearly 6 days. He said Jodi was likely suffering from acute stress at the time of the murder, sending her body into a sort of fight or flight mode to defend herself, which caused her brain to stop retaining memory. That's actually a real thing. People who are, under severe trauma can sort of black out and lose time. This severe fight or flight reaction is pure survival instinct. And so sometimes your brain can kind of shut down and not really record the events that transpired. Samuels also diagnosed Jodi Arias with PTSD following the ordeal of all of this. Whether or not PTSD can be faked, of course. I'm not saying that Jodi did fake it. She might have felt that she was traumatized. She might have actually even believed that she was a victim. But the fact that these types of behaviors and her bizarre behavior when she was arrested, when she was interrogated, all of the stalking and all of these things go to painting Jodi as a very manipulative type of person. Whether or not she actually had PTSD or whether she was faking it, that's really, I don't know. Beginning on March 26th, Alice LaViolette, a psychotherapist who specializes in domestic violence, testified that Jodi was a victim of domestic abuse and that most victims do not tell anyone about abuse because they feel ashamed and humiliated. Well, that's not what, Jodi continued to, assert that she had been abused. She even eventually confessed to murdering Travis as a result of this abuse, which of course, may or may not have been true. She lied about so much other stuff that it's hard to believe much of what she says at all. Clinical psychologist Janine DeMarte then testified for the prosecution, stating that she had found no evidence that Travis had abused Jodi and no evidence of PTSD or amnesia in Arias. So all of these psychologists and psychotherapists that were testifying that she'd been abused, she suffered PTSD, et cetera, et cetera. These were all witnesses for the defense. So they were being paid by the defense team, and that may or may not have influenced their testimony. We don't know, but for every time you find someone who can tell you one thing, you can always find someone who will refute that. Furthermore, Jodi's claim of total memory loss for long stretches of time was inconsistent with traumatic amnesia associated with PTSD, which manifests as much shorter gaps in memory. So Jodi claimed that she had blackouts for very, very long stretches of time. And this, again, is not really in line with how these types of things work, these memory gaps, these blackouts that are associated with severe trauma and PTSD. They tend to be much shorter in duration. And so although they do happen, these psychologists who testified on behalf of the prosecution felt that it did not match up with what they thought would be a usual type of reaction to these types of situations. Instead, DeMarte said that Arias suffered from borderline personality disorder, showing signs of immaturity and an unstable sense of identity. This certainly, she's one of those people who just screams borderline personality disorder. The lack of ability to be alone, the obsessive phone calls at 4:00 in the morning, not wanting to feel, abandoned, blowing everything way out of proportion, exaggerated types of claims and things like that. This is all very, very indicative of borderline personality disorder. So yeah, that's a very, very good diagnosis. People who suffer from such a disorder have, quote, a terrifying feeling of being abandoned by others. DeMarte told jurors, which of course is, one of the hallmark diagnostic criteria for borderline personality disorder, a tense almost phobia of being abandoned, and she took every single little thing that Travis did or did not do as a means or some kind of evidence that he didn't love her or that he wasn't committed to her, etc. And she just hounded him over and over and over. It was constant. That's very, very common in people with borderline personality disorder. The final defense witness was psychologist Robert Geffner, who said that DeMarte's borderline diagnosis was really not appropriate, and that all tests taken by Arias since her arrest pointed more towards an anxiety disorder stemming from her trauma. He also said that the test indicated that she answered questions honestly without lying. So again, this was another defense witness who's going to refute everything that the prosecution witnesses are going to say, mainly because they are the ones who are paying him. And so, you can argue on either side of a whole lot of issues, and you can take one thing and, play devil's advocate and punch holes in every little thing, but that still doesn't make it correct or even applicable to the current situation. On April 24th, in response to previous testimony given by Jodi about buying a 5-gallon gas can from Walmart in Salinas on June 3rd, 2008, that she returned the same day, the prosecution called Amanda Webb, an employee from the only Walmart in Salinas, to the stand. Webb testified that, according to Walmart's records, no one returned a 5-gallon gas can on that date, and that Jodi returned the gas can a week later rather than on June 3rd. The gas can evidence was seen as important in establishing premeditation, as the prosecution argued that Arias was trying to avoid being recorded on gas station security cameras on her way to Mesa. So she bought this big gas can so she could fill it up in Salinas, where she lived, and she wouldn't be caught on camera getting gas on her way to Mesa, Arizona, which is where Travis lived, and that can give her a possible alibi. So she filled up her car with all these gas cans so she wouldn't need to stop. In closing arguments on May 4th, Arias' defense argued that premeditation theory did not really make sense. They said, quote, "What happened in that moment in time? The relationship of chaos that ended in chaos as well. There is nothing about what happened on June 4th in that bathroom that looks planned. Couldn't it also be that after everything they went through in that relationship, that she simply snapped? Ultimately, if Miss Arias is guilty of any crime at all, it is the crime of manslaughter and nothing more." End quote. In rebuttal, Martinez, the prosecutor, described the extent and variety of Travis's wounds. He said, quote, "There is no evidence that he ever laid a hand on her, ever, not once. Nothing indicates that this is anything less than a slaughter. There is no way to appease this woman who just would not leave him alone." End quote. On May 7th, 2013, after 15 hours of deliberation, Jodi Arias was found guilty of first-degree murder. Out of the 12 jurors present, 5 found her guilty of first-degree premeditated murder, and 7 jurors found her guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and felony murder. As the guilty verdict was read, Travis's family smiled and hugged each other. People outside the courtroom began cheering and chanting. You know how these public things go. The aggravation phase of the trial. Following the conviction, the prosecution was required to convince the jury that the murder was, quote, "cruel, heinous, or depraved," end quote, in order for them to determine that Arias was eligible for the death penalty. The aggravation phase of the trial started on May 15th, 2013. The only witness was the medical examiner who performed the autopsy. Arias' attorneys, who had repeatedly asked to step down from the case, gave only brief statements in closing arguments in which they said the adrenaline rushing through Travis's body may have prevented him from feeling much pain during his death. The prosecution showed photos of the corpse and crime scene to the jury, then paused for 2 minutes in silence to illustrate how long he said it took for Alexander to die at Arias' hands. Very dramatic. After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury determined that Jodi was eligible for the death penalty. Now comes the penalty phase of the trial. On May 21st, Jodi Arias was offered an allocution during which she pleaded for a life sentence. She acknowledged that her plea for life was a reversal of remarks she made to a television reporter shortly after her conviction, when she said she preferred the death penalty. So Jodi actually, at one point, she sought the death penalty. She wanted them to kill her. She said, quote, "Each time I said that, I meant it, but I lacked perspective. Until very recently, I could not imagine standing before you and asking you to give me life." End quote. She said that she changed her mind to avoid bringing more pain to members of her family who were in the courtroom. So she went to wanting the death penalty to now wanting life in prison. She'd already been found guilty. The death penalty was obviously an option, but she said, in order to spare her family the pain of her death, she wanted them to spare her life. At one point, she held up a white t-shirt with the word survivor written across it, telling the jurors that she would sell the clothing and donate all the proceeds to victims of domestic abuse. Again, she's trying to play this domestic abuse card and gain some form of sympathy. She also said that she would donate her hair to Locks of Love while in prison and had already done so 3 times while she was in jail. I don't know. That evening, Arias said that she did not know whether the jury would come back with life or death. She said, quote, "Whatever they come back with, I will have to deal with it. I will have no other choice," end quote. Well, you got that right. Regarding the verdict, she said, quote, "I felt like a huge sense of unreality. I felt betrayed actually by the jury. I was hoping they would see things for what they are. I felt really awful for my family for what they were thinking," end quote. So again, what they were thinking about her is how you should probably hear that. She didn't want to be thought of as a bad person, even though she, at this point she was a convicted murderer. On May 23rd, the sentencing fate of Arias' trial resulted in a hung jury, prompting the judge to declare a mistrial for that phase only. So her guilty verdict would stand, but a mistrial for the penalty phase, so that would have to be repeated. The jury had reached an 8-4 decision in favor of the death penalty. Of course, a death penalty has to be unanimous. After the jury was discharged, the jury foreman stated that the jury found the responsibility of weighing the death sentence overwhelming, but were horrified when their efforts ended in a mistrial. He said, quote, "By the end of it, we were mentally and emotionally exhausted. I think we were horrified when we found out that they had actually called a mistrial and we felt like we had failed," end quote. The case went through several appeals and declaration of mistrials. Prosecutorial misconduct was alleged against the lead prosecutor, Juan Martinez, stating that he had yelled at witnesses, attacked witnesses on a personal level, and thrown evidence. The accusations also alleged that Martinez chose to release evidence and to pose for pictures with his fans on the steps of the courthouse. The defense attorneys claimed that Jodi was in a position in which she could not present a complete defense and that the only constitutional recourse of action was to declare yet another mistrial. Jodi received death threats and stated that she was no longer willing to testify because of the threats. The motion, of course, was denied, as was a motion for a stay in the proceedings that had been sought to give time to appeal the decisions of the Arizona Supreme Court. On May 29th, 2012, the Arizona Supreme Court declined to hear an appeal filed 3 months earlier, also refused by the mid-level Arizona Court of Appeals based on the previously described misconduct of the prosecution. So the Supreme Court of Arizona said that they did not have sufficient evidence for prosecutorial misconduct and that all of this showboating and shenanigans had no weight, no bearing, and no legal recourse. The sentencing phase. After a trial that lasted almost 6 years, 6 years, yes, 6 years, Jodi was convicted of first-degree murder in 2013 after 2 juries had initially failed to reach a unanimous decision on whether the death penalty should be given. Sentencing was scheduled for April 7th, 2015, with the judge having the option to sentence Arias either life imprisonment without the possibility of parole or with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The death penalty option was again deadlocked by a jury 11-1. So they had one holdout. Death penalty have to be, unanimous. So the judge was only allowed to sentence her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole or with the possibility of parole after 25 years. On April 13th, Judge Stevens sentenced Jodi Arias to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In June of 2015, Jodi was ordered to pay more than $32,000 to Travis's siblings. Her attorney stated that this was about 1/3 of the amount requested. So I guess it looks like they probably sued her in civil court for damages. As of 2016, Jodi is housed at the Arizona Department of Corrections. Her inmate number is 281129. The Arizona Department of Corrections is located at the Arizona State Prison Complex at Perryville. She started her sentence in the complex's maximum security Lumley unit, but she has the possibility of being possibly downgraded to the medium security level depending on her behavior while there. Travis himself is buried at Riverside, California's Olivewood Memorial Park Cemetery. And that is the story of Jodi Arias. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. I wanted to apologize for, we've kind of been off the air for a little while. Things have just been very, very busy here at the agency, and it's just hard to kind of sit down and record these and edit these and get them researched and everything. But I will try to do much better. I will not go another year without posting a video. So thank you for sticking around. Thank you for listening to this, and I wish you guys all the best. All right. Bye-bye.
This has been The Investigation Guru, hosted by Sean and Dana, a presentation of Red Door Investigations in the DFW Metroplex of Texas, specializing in infidelity, fraud, child custody, missing persons, and more. Check out our website at reddoorinvestigations.com or on social media at RedDoorPI. For more fascinating deep dives into real true crime, subscribe to the show today. Many elements of an investigation have to remain secret, but not this podcast. Our best advertising has always been word of mouth, so please share the feed with a friend today. And if you'd like to support the show, we offer some goodies on our Patreon at patreon.com/INVGuruPod. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.